significantly more difficult if handled poorly. Sir, that uniform belonged to my wife, Captain Sarah Spencer. She was killed in action in Afghanistan 3 years ago.
I'm getting set up. Give me a sec, guys.
He repeated, his tone suggesting deep skepticism about this claim. Convenient story. Easy to say when there's no way to verify it. Corporal Morgan stepped forward slightly, his expression uncomfortable with the direction this confrontation was taking. Sergeant Major, maybe we should. Maybe you should mind your own business, Corporal. Grant snapped without taking his eyes off Harper. This is about respect for military traditions and proper conduct on a military installation. Harper felt the weight of attention from everyone in the store, their conversations having stopped entirely as the confrontation escalated. She could see her father's hands clenching into fists and recognized the signs that his carefully controlled temper was approaching dangerous territory. In that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Sergeant Major Grant, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. If you don't believe my mother earned the right to wear this uniform, I'd be happy to show you what she taught.
Unauthorized personnel detected.
Please
do not interact with structure.
When understanding dawned, his expression shifted to something between amusement and outright mockery.
Shut up, Sebastian.
Oh, really? And what exactly did Mommy teach you? How to polish boots? How to make your bed with hospital corners? She taught me how to shoot, Harper replied simply. The statement was delivered without bravado or artificial drama. Just a straightforward acknowledgement of fact that somehow carried more weight than any amount of theatrical posturing could have achieved. Grant stared at her for several seconds, clearly trying to determine whether she was serious or simply trying to deflect his criticism through absurd claims. You're telling me, Grant said slowly, that a 12-year-old girl thinks she can shoot better than trained soldiers? I'm not telling you I think anything, Harper corrected, with the kind of precision that suggested careful attention to language. I'm offering to demonstrate what my mother taught me, if you're interested in seeing it. Ryan Spencer felt his heart sink as he recognized both the courage and the danger in his daughter's challenge. Harper had indeed inherited her mother's exceptional marksmanship abilities, but exposing those skills in this confrontation context could create complications he wasn't prepared to handle. Harper, maybe this is.
Would you like to join him, Casa?
Actually, Grant interrupted, his voice taking on the cruel edge of someone who had identified an opportunity to make his point dramatically. I think this is exactly the right time. If the little girl wants to play soldier, let's see what she's got. He turned to address the gathered soldiers, his tone becoming more theatrical as he sensed the entertainment value in what was about to unfold. How about it, people? Anyone else curious to see what kind of training a 12-year-old got from her supposed sniper mother? The invitation was clearly designed to humiliate Harper by exposing the gap between the childish fantasies and military reality. But Grant had fundamentally miscalculated both Harper's capabilities and the consequences of his public challenge. Private Grant looked uncomfortable with the entire situation, while Corporal Morgan seemed torn between loyalty to his senior NCO and growing uneasiness about the direction this was heading. Eagle's peak range is open for training this morning, Grant continued, building momentum as he sensed the audience's engagement. What do you say we take a little field trip? Give everyone a chance to see what kind of marksmanship gets passed down from fantasy soldiers to their little girls. Harper looked up at her father, seeing in his expression the same conflict that had defined much of their relationship since her mother's death. Ryan wanted to protect her from exactly this kind of public scrutiny, but he also understood that backing down now would validate every dismissive assumption Grant had made about their family's military legacy. Dad, Harper said quietly, it's okay. I want to do this. Ryan studied his daughter's face, seeing in her features the same determined expression that Sarah had worn when facing impossible odds in combat situations. The resemblance was so strong it made his chest tighten with grief and pride in equal measure. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Sergeant Major, Ryan said, his voice carrying a new edge that suggested Grant might want to reconsider his assumptions. Let's go to the range. As the impromptu group began moving toward the commissary exit, Harper walked beside her father with the kind of calm focus that would have been remarkable in a trained soldier, let alone a child. She was about to demonstrate abilities that most people would find difficult to believe, but for Harper, it felt like coming home to something that had always been part of her identity. The morning sun grew stronger as they stepped outside, and Harper squinted slightly as her eyes adjusted to the brightness. In a few minutes, she would be standing on Eagles Peak Range with a rifle in her hands, finally given the opportunity to honor her mother's memory in the most meaningful way she knew how. Grant's laughter echoed across the parking lot as he regaled his followers with predictions about the upcoming humiliation he was about to deliver to the Spencer family. He had no idea that he was walking toward a demonstration that would fundamentally challenge everything he thought he knew about talent, respect, and the true meaning of military excellence. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Eagles Peak shooting range sprawled across a natural valley between two rocky ridges, its concrete firing positions and steel target frames creating geometric patterns against the wild Colorado landscape. The facility could accommodate everything from basic marksmanship training to advanced sniper courses, with lanes extending from 25 meters out to an impressive 800 meters through the mountain terrain. Captain Jake Crosshair Mitchell was conducting routine maintenance on the range equipment when he spotted the unusual group approaching from the base parking area. At 35, Mitchell had spent the better part of a decade perfecting his own shooting skills and teaching others, but he had never seen Sergeant Major Grant bring civilians to the range for what appeared to be an impromptu demonstration. "Morning, Sergeant Major," Mitchell called out as the group reached the range control tower. His trained eye immediately cataloged the participants. Grant and several enlisted personnel he recognized, a maintenance worker whose bearing suggested former military service, and most surprisingly, a young girl in an impeccably fitted camouflage uniform. "Mitchell," Grant replied with the kind of expansive good humor that typically preceded something unpleasant, "we've got ourselves a special situation here. This little lady claims her mother was some kind of hotshot sniper, and she wants to show us what she learned." Mitchell's expression grew more serious as he processed this information. Range safety was his primary responsibility, and the presence of a child introduced variables that weren't covered in standard operating procedures. "Sir, I'm not sure we have protocols for minors using military weapons on a training range." "Well, we're about to establish some new protocols," Grant said dismissively. "Unless you think that a 12-year-old poses some kind of threat to range safety." The challenge in Grant's voice made it clear that questioning his judgment would be interpreted as a lack of confidence in his command authority. Mitchell found himself in the familiar position of having to choose between following regulations and avoiding conflict with a senior NCO whose displeasure could make life significantly more complicated. Harper stepped forward before Mitchell could respond, her voice carrying the kind of respectful formality that suggested familiarity with military customs. "Captain Mitchell, I understand your concerns about range safety. I've been trained in proper weapon handling and range procedures. I'd be happy to demonstrate my knowledge before touching any equipment." The offer surprised Mitchell, who was accustomed to dealing with soldiers who often needed extensive safety briefings before being trusted with weapons. The girl's mature approach to the situation suggested either exceptional training or an unusual understanding of military protocols. "What kind of training have you had?" Mitchell asked, his professional curiosity overriding his initial reluctance.
Growling.
"My mother started teaching me when I was 8. Harper replied simply. "Trigger control. We practiced every weekend when she was stateside." Corporal Morgan had been listening to this exchange with growing unease about the direction events were taking. "Captain," he said carefully, "maybe we should verify some of this before proceeding." Grant turned on the young corporal with obvious irritation. "Verify what, exactly?" "And I'm curious to see what kind of nonsense she's been taught by her fantasy soldier mother." The casual dismissal of Harper's mother drew a reaction from Ryan Spencer, whose carefully maintained composure showed signs of strain. Sergeant Major Captain Sarah Spencer received the Silver Star for her actions in Afghanistan. Her service record speaks for itself. Does it? Grant replied with theatrical skepticism. Because I've never heard of any female snipers earning silver stars. Sounds like the kind of story families tell themselves to make their losses seem more meaningful. The accusation hung in the mountain air like a challenge to everything the Spencer family held sacred about Sarah's memory and service. Mitchell found himself caught between his duty to maintain range safety and his growing discomfort with Grant's handling of what was clearly a sensitive family situation. Before the confrontation could escalate further, a new voice cut through the tension with unmistakable authority. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? Staff Sergeant Nina Sharp-Price approached from the Advanced Marksmanship Training Building, her stride carrying the confident precision of someone accustomed to commanding respect in male-dominated environments. At 32, Price had established herself as one of the Army's premier sniper instructors, with combat experience that included 2 deployments to Afghanistan and a reputation for excellence that transcended gender boundaries. Price's arrival shifted the dynamic immediately, as everyone present recognized her expertise and authority in matters related to over the assembled group before settling on Harper with obvious professional interest. Captain Spencer, Price said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the immediate group. Angel 6, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. The identification hit Ryan Spencer like an electric shock, confirming not only that Price had known his wife, but that she remembered Sarah's call sign and unit designation. Harper's eyes widened as she realized she was meeting someone who had actually served with her mother in combat. You knew her, Harper said, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew her, Price confirmed, her expression softening slightly as she studied Harper's features. Best natural shooter I ever worked with. Could put 3 rounds through the same hole at 600 meters in a crosswind that would challenge most trained snipers. Grant's confident demeanor faltered slightly as Price's testimony contradicted his dismissive assumptions about Sarah Spencer's military service. Staff Sergeant, I wasn't aware you had served with supposed sniper personnel in Afghanistan. Supposed? Price's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several soldiers take unconscious steps backward. Sergeant Major Captain Spencer saved my life and the lives of 12 other Rangers during an ambush outside Kandahar. There was nothing supposed about her abilities or her service. The confirmation of Sarah's combat record from someone with Price's credentials fundamentally altered the context of the confrontation. Grant found himself in the uncomfortable position of having publicly questioned the service of a decorated war hero, while Harper felt validation for everything she had been taught to believe about her mother's legacy. Well, Grant said, clearly struggling to maintain his dominant position in the conversation, even if her mother was some kind of soldier, that doesn't mean the kid inherited any actual skills. Kids don't become marksmen just because their parents could shoot. Price studied Harper with the evaluating gaze of a professional instructor assessing potential talent. How old were you when your mother started training you? 8, Harper replied. She said marksmanship was like music, easier to learn when you start young, but you have to practice every day to maintain the skill. What's the longest shot you've ever made? Price asked, her tone suggesting genuine professional interest rather than skeptical challenge. Harper considered the question carefully before responding. 450 meters, using Mom's rifle with iron sights. But that was 6 months ago, and I've grown since then, so my sight picture. The casual mention of making a 400-meter shot with iron sights drew sharp attention from everyone present who understood the technical difficulty of such an achievement. Mitchell found himself reassessing his initial assumptions about the girl's claimed abilities. Staff Sergeant, Grant interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Surely you're not suggesting we allow a child to use military weapons based on unsupported claims about her training. Price's response carried the weight of professional expertise and moral authority that Grant couldn't easily dismiss. I'm suggesting that if Harper Spencer is half the shooter her mother is, exceptional natural ability that deserves respectful evaluation rather than public mockery. The rebuke was delivered with military courtesy, putting Grant in the position position of either backing down from his confrontational stance or escalating the conflict with someone whose combat credentials and professional reputation exceeded his own. Fine, Grant said after a moment of calculation. Let's see what the little girl can do. But when she embarrasses herself trying to handle weapons she's not trained for, I don't want to hear any excuses about how she would have done better with different... That the situation had moved beyond his ability to control through normal safety protocols. If we're going to do that, we need to follow procedures. I'll need to verify her basic weapons safety knowledge before allowing her to handle any firearms. That's reasonable, Harper said, her calm acceptance of safety requirements further demonstrating the maturity that had surprised everyone present. What would you like me to demonstrate? For the next 15 minutes, Mitchell conducted an informal but thorough evaluation of Harper's knowledge of basic weapon safety, range procedures, and marksmanship fundamentals. Her responses revealed not only comprehensive understanding of technical concepts, but practical experience that went far beyond theoretical knowledge. Acceptable, Mitchell concluded, though his tone suggested the evaluation had exceeded his expectations significantly. We'll start with basic familiarization on a 25-meter range before considering longer distances. Price had been observing this evaluation with growing...
Bro, it literally pulled up my menu.
Insights valuable for our instructional programs.
You really suck at this.
From a professional development standpoint. But it also ensured that Harper would have an advocate present who understood both her family's military legacy and the technical aspects of advanced marksmanship. As the
that wasn't exactly a staring contest.
Harper walked
what were you doing?
With obvious eagerness to learn more about her mother's service.
Something.
Staff Sergeant, what was she like in combat situations? Cool under pressure, Price replied without hesitation. Never rushed a shot, never let emotions affect her judgment. She used to say that good shooting was 90% mental discipline and 10% technical skill. Grant overheard this exchange with obvious skepticism about the wisdom of building up a child's expectations before what he anticipated would be a humiliating failure. All this talk about mental discipline and technical skill sounds impressive, but shooting targets on a controlled range is completely different from actual combat situations. You're right about that, Price agreed, though not in the way Grant had intended. Combat shooting is much more difficult. Fortunately, we're starting with basic range work to evaluate fundamental skills. As they reached the firing line, Harper looked out across the range with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was already calculating distances, wind conditions, and sight adjustments. The morning sun had climbed higher in the Colorado sky, creating favorable lighting conditions for precision shooting. Mitchell began setting up targets at the 25-meter line while Harper familiarized herself with the M4 carbine that would be used for the initial demonstration. Her handling of the weapon was smooth and confident, showing none of the hesitation or uncertainty that typically characterized first-time shooters. "Ready when you are, Miss Spencer," Mitchell announced after completing his target setup. Harper settled into a supported prone position with fluid economy of movement, her body alignment and weapon handling demonstrating hours of careful training and practice. As she began her sight picture alignment, the casual conversations around the firing line gradually fell silent. Grant positioned himself where he could observe both Harper's shooting and the reactions of the other soldiers, anticipating the moment when reality would deflate the girl's pretensions and validate his assessment of the situation. He had no way of knowing that he was about to witness something that would challenge every assumption he had made about talent, training, and military excellence. The silence that settled over Eagle's Peak range held the weight of expectation and disbelief as Harper Spencer adjusted her cheek weld against the M4 carbine stock. Through the rifle's iron sights, the target 25 meters downrange appeared crisp and clear, its black bullseye standing out against the white background like a challenge waiting to be answered. "Take your time," Captain Mitchell said quietly from his position as range safety officer. There's no rush. Harper's breathing had already settled into the controlled rhythm her mother had taught her. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze. The trigger press was smooth and deliberate, breaking cleanly, the kind of technique that typically required months of training to develop. The sharp crack of the rifle shot echoed off the surrounding ridges, followed immediately by the distinctive ping of a bullet striking steel. Through his binoculars, Mitchell observed the target with professional assessment before announcing his findings. Center mass, good shot. Grant had positioned himself where he could watch both Harper's technique and the target results, expecting to witness the kind of scattered grouping that would validate his assumptions about children playing with adult weapons. The single-centered hit was impressive, but hardly conclusive evidence of exceptional ability.
I'm just trying to loot up.
Grant declared with confident dismissal. Anyone can get lucky once. Staff Sergeant Price stepped forward with a kind of calm authority that came from years of training elite marksmen. Miss Spencer, would you be comfortable attempting a 5-round group? Yes, ma'am, Harper replied without lifting her eye from the sight picture. The formal address drew approving nods from the military personnel present, demonstrating respect for rank that went beyond surface politeness. What followed was a demonstration of marksmanship that silenced every skeptical comment and dismissive prediction. Harper's second shot struck within inches of the first, followed by 3 more rounds that created a grouping so tight it appeared to be a single enlarged hole in the target's center ring. Mitchell lowered his binoculars with an expression of professional amazement that he made no attempt to conceal. 5 rounds, approximately 1-inch group at 25 meters. That's expert-level shooting, by any standard. The announcement created ripples of conversation among the soldiers who had gathered to witness what they expected to be a child's embarrassing failure. Corporal Morgan found himself reconsidering every assumption he had made about Harper's capabilities, while Private Graham stared at the target display with the kind of awe typically reserved for watching professionals perform impossible feats. Graham's confident demeanor showed the first signs of uncertainty as he processed results that directly contradicted his expectations. Fine, she can hit a target at close range. But 25 meters isn't real shooting. Any recruit can be taught to hit targets when they're practically close enough to reach out and touch. Price turned toward Grant with the patient expression of an instructor dealing with a particularly stubborn student. Sergeant Major, what distance would you consider appropriate for evaluating marksmanship skills? The question was clearly a trap, but Grant's pride wouldn't allow him to back down from the challenge he had initiated. Real soldiers qualify at 300 meters. If she's such a hot shot, let's see how she does at a distance where skill actually matters. Harper lifted her head from the rifle scope for the first time since beginning her demonstration, looking toward her father with a questioning expression that sought permission rather than validation. Ryan Spencer felt his throat tighten as he recognized in his daughter's face the same focused determination that had characterized Sarah's approach to impossible challenges. Harper, Ryan said quietly, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. I know, Dad, she replied with a kind of gentle firmness that reminded him powerfully of her mother. But I want to. A comfortable position of facilitating a demonstration that was rapidly moving beyond standard safety protocols and into uncharted territory. Miss Spencer, 300-meter shooting requires different equipment and procedures. The targets are smaller, the sight adjustments are more complex, and environmental factors become much more significant. I understand, Captain, Harper said respectfully. My mother taught me about range estimation, wind reading, and ballistic compensation. I'd like to try if you think it's safe. Price had been evaluating Harper's performance with a clinical assessment of someone whose job involved identifying exceptional talent and developing it to maximum potential. Captain Mitchell, with your permission, I'd like to set up a 300-meter target and observe Miss Spencer's technique at extended range. The request carried sufficient professional weight that Mitchell felt obligated to accommodate it, despite his growing concerns about the irregular nature of the entire situation. Very well. But we'll follow full long-range safety protocols, and Miss Spencer will need to demonstrate proper scope adjustment and range estimation before attempting any shots. As the group moved to the 300-meter firing position, Harper walked beside Price with obvious eagerness to learn from someone who had worked alongside her mother. Staff Sergeant, did my mother ever talk about teaching me to shoot? She talked about you constantly. Alice replied with a slight smile that transformed her typically serious expression.
Oh, I forgot about that
She was
girl.
incredibly proud
I
of
always
your
hate that
natural
one.
ability. She was also concerned about making sure you understood the responsibility that comes with exceptional skills. Grant overheard this exchange with mounting frustration about the way events were developing. What had begun as an opportunity to humiliate a presumptuous child was becoming a validation of everything he had sought to disprove about the Spencer family's military credentials. The 300-meter range stretched across a natural bowl in the mountainous terrain, with target frames positioned at precise distances and marked with range indicators. The setup required more sophisticated equipment, including a scoped rifle and shooting rests that could accommodate the precision necessary for long-range work. Mitchell began configuring a bolt-action rifle equipped with a variable power scope, while explaining the additional complexities involved in extended range shooting. At 300 meters, bullet drop becomes significant, dangerous to move your point of impact several inches, and minor errors in sight alignment are magnified dramatically. Harper listened to this briefing with the kind of attentive focus that suggested she was processing technical information rather than simply hearing words. When Mitchell finished his explanation, she asked questions that demonstrated both theoretical understanding and practical experience with the concepts being discussed. "What's the estimated wind speed at target distance?" she asked, studying the vegetation movement near the 300-meter line. Mitchell consulted his wind meter before responding. "Approximately 5 to 7 miles per hour, left to right." Harper nodded thoughtfully, her gaze moving between the target and various environmental indicators that would affect bullet trajectory. With the ammunition for use, that should require about a 2-minute correction to the right, assuming standard atmospheric conditions. The casual precision of the ballistic calculation drew sharp attention from everyone present who possessed sufficient knowledge to evaluate. Price exchanged a meaningful glance with Mitchell, both recognizing that Harper's technical understanding far exceeded what would be expected from casual training. "That's correct," Mitchell confirmed after running his own calculations. "How did you determine that so quickly? You made me practice ballistic math until I could do the calculations.
Oh, I hate you.
Automatically,"
I hate you.
Harper explained simply. She said that in real situations, you don't always have time to work through the formulas step by step. Grant had been listening to this technical discussion with growing discomfort about the competence Harper was demonstrating in areas where he had expected ignorance and confusion. All this theoretical knowledge is impressive, but shooting is about performance under pressure, not classroom mathematics. "You're absolutely right," Harper agreed pleasantly, settling into position behind the scoped rifle with movements that demonstrated familiarity with precision equipment. "Theory only matters if you can apply it consistently." The transition from standing conversation to shooting position was none of the awkwardness or hesitation that typically characterized inexperienced shooters working with unfamiliar.
Back here again, are we?
Yeah, I thought it was the actual door, Sebastian. Come on, just give me the file. I already died to him once.
And muscle memory development.
Come on,
As she began
Sebastian.
her sight
I'm not
picture
going to be here
alignment,
for
the
long.
conversations around the firing
There we
range
go. The
diminished
good,
until the
good
only sounds were
people.
wind rustling
Maybe
through
don't
the
be in
mountains
such a
and
hurry next
distant
time.
calls of birds circling above the ridges. The target at 300 meters appeared smaller than a dinner plate through the rifle scope, its scoring rings barely visible even with magnification. Harper's breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded precision shooting, her entire being focused on the complex coordination of sight alignment, trigger control, and environmental compensation that separated amateur shooting from professional marksmanship. The morning sun had climbed higher in the Colorado sky, creating favorable lighting conditions, but also introducing thermal effects that could influence bullet trajectory. "Ready when you are," Mitchell announced after completing his safety checks and target verification. The shot that followed was preceded by several seconds of absolute stillness, as Harper made final adjustments to her sight picture and breathing. When the rifle fired, the sound seemed sharper and more authoritative than the previous demonstration, as though the weapon itself recognized the precision being demanded of it. Through his spotting scope, Mitchell tracked the bullet's path to the target with professional interest that quickly transformed into amazement. Dead center bullseye. Approximate distance from point of aim: less than 1 inch. The announcement created a moment of stunned silence as the implications of Harper's performance settled over the assembled
Entity
group.
fishing. Let's try this.
Looked between the target and Harper with an expression that suggested
Let's try this
he was
real quick.
witnessing something that
I'm
challenged his
interested.
understanding of what was possible, while Corporal Morgan found himself reconsidering every assumption he had made about civilian versus military capabilities. Grant stared at the target through his own binoculars, desperately seeking some explanation for results that contradicted everything he had expected to observe. One shot doesn't prove anything. Anybody can get lucky with the right equipment. Price's response carried the quiet authority of someone whose expertise was beyond question. Sergeant Major, that wasn't luck. That
Man,
was
this
exceptional
remix.
marksmanship skill applied under controlled conditions. Prove it. Grant snapped, his frustration finally overriding his professional composure. Is she so good? Let her do it again. Harper looked up from the rifle scope with an expression of calm acceptance that suggested she had expected this challenge. How many shots would you like me to fire, Sergeant Major? The question was asked with such straightforward sincerity that it took Grant several seconds to formulate a response that would satisfy his need to find some flaw in Harper's performance. 5 shots. If you're really as good as you claim, you should be able to repeat that performance consistently. I understand, Harper replied, settling back into position with movements that had become increasingly fluid and confident as the demonstration progressed. What followed was a display of precision shooting that exceeded even Price's expectations based on her knowledge of Harper's mother's capabilities. Each shot struck within the target's center ring, creating a grouping so tight that spotting
I have to do the
individual
stupid
bullet holes
tutorial.
required careful examination through high-powered optics. When Mitchell announced the final results, his voice carried a note of professional reverence typically reserved for witnessing genuinely exceptional performance. 5 rounds, total group size approximately 2 inches at 300 meters. That represents shooting at the level of advanced sniper training. The silence that followed this announcement was profound and uncomfortable, as everyone present processed the reality that they had just witnessed a 12-year-old girl demonstrate marksmanship skills that exceeded those of most trained soldiers. Grant found himself confronting the complete collapse of every assumption he had made about Harper's abilities and her family's military credentials. The aftermath of Harper's demonstration created an uncomfortable vacuum of silence that stretched across Eagle's Peak Range like a challenge waiting to be acknowledged. Sergeant Major Grant stood motionless behind his binoculars, his jaw working silently as he processed results that had demolished every confident prediction he had made about the morning's outcome. Colonel and Warrior Phillips
Basically, crack the lock, but
Harper's
I like an
final
arcade
shots,
game.
drawn by reports of unusual activity involving civilian personnel and weapons training. At 48, Phillips commanded Fort Valor with the kind of balanced authority that came from combat experience, administrative competence, and an intuitive understanding of when situations required command intervention rather than delegation. Captain Mitchell, Phillips said as she approached the firing line, her tone carrying the neutral professionalism that preceded either commendation or serious consequences. I understand we have a regular training situation developing here. Mitchell snapped to attention with the reflexive precision of someone whose career depended on maintaining proper military courtesy. Yes, ma'am. We've been observing a marksmanship demonstration by Miss Harper Spencer, daughter of the late Captain Sarah Spencer. Phillips' expression shifted subtly as she processed this information, her military memory immediately connecting the Spencer name with unit histories and casualty reports from Afghanistan operations. Captain Spencer, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers, Silver Star recipient. The confirmation from the base commander carried additional weight that finally penetrated Grant's defensive skepticism about Sarah Spencer's service record. Phillips' knowledge of specific unit designations and decorations indicated that Sarah's combat reputation extended beyond local legend into official military recognition. Colonel, Staff Sergeant Price, stepped forward with respectful formality. Miss Spencer has just completed a 5-round group at 300 meters that meets advanced sniper qualification standards. Her technique and consistency indicate exceptional training and natural ability. Phillips studied Harper, who remained in shooting position with a kind of disciplined stillness that suggested she understood the significance of having the base commander observe her performance. Miss Spencer, I'd like to speak with you privately. Captain confidential, secure the range and ensure all equipment is properly stored. As the other personnel began clearing equipment and targets, Phillips gestured for Harper and Ryan to follow her toward the range control building. Grant hesitated for a moment before stepping forward with obvious reluctance to involve himself in what had become a command-level situation. "Colonel Phillips," Grant said carefully, "I believe there may be some security and safety considerations regarding civilian access to military training facilities that should be addressed." Phillips turned toward Grant with the kind of measuring gaze that experienced officers used when evaluating subordinates who might be exceeding their authority. "Sergeant Major, are you suggesting that you initiated this demonstration without considering security implications?" The question was designed to place responsibility for the morning's events squarely on Grant's shoulders, forcing him to defend decisions that he now realized might be difficult to justify through official channels. "Ma'am, the situation developed organically from a discussion about military traditions and respect for uniform standards." "I see," Phillips replied with the kind of neutral tone that typically preceded uncomfortable conversations about judgment and leadership. "We'll discuss your role in these events later. Right now I'm more interested in understanding Miss Spencer's background and capabilities." Inside the range control building,